I'm delighted to speak to you today about my research, which has recently been enhanced by a serendipitous letter. My research on this letter is at an early stage, and I'm not offering great insight today. Rather, I wish to share the letter with you as legal history in an unusual place, because I found the letter on eBay. It's a letter from a son to his mother and offers a journey through the early 19th century through the eyes of a provincial articled clerk. I'm going to read the letter and briefly outline how I might analyse it before developing two elements by way of example. In 2017, the solicitor and distinguished academic Professor Stephen Cretney presented a fascinating paper as part of the LSE Legal Biographies project titled, "Are Solicitors' Lives Necessarily Boring?" Although he was talking about the difficulty of writing biography of 20th century solicitors, perhaps the same may be asked of solicitors in the 19th century. Certainly, little has been written about ordinary solicitors in this period. So my letter affords an opportunity to gain insights into the life of a soon-to-be qualified solicitor, and I hope you will agree when you've heard it that the life revealed is certainly not boring. So this is the writer of the letter, circa 1870, John Theodore Hoyle, solicitor and coroner, a serious middle-aged man with long whiskers, wearing an undistinguished high-buttoned jacket. His life and work was the focus of my PhD. Hoyle did not leave a cache of papers, so I had to search for clues to his life, and I found pictures, letters, notebooks, and newspaper reports. And although my thesis is long completed, it seems I'm not yet finished with Mr. Hoyle. Which brings me to eBay. This summer I noticed a letter for sale on eBay as part of a collection of railway memorabilia. The listing said, 1830 JT Hoyle, Denton Hall, Newcastle, letter, home, Victorian London Railway. I recognised the address and I pressed buy it now to beat the railway enthusiasts. The letter is written in black ink on thick off-white paper. It is one folded sheet watermarked J. Whatman 1828. Whatman produced finest quality wove paper. The letter was sent 10 years before the advent of postage stamps and addressed to Mrs. Hoyle, Denton Hall, Newcastle upon Tyne. It is stamped 27 October 1830 and posted in the morning, as evidenced by the single ring around the postmark, introduced at the end of the 18th century following a fraud case. The mark would have been made with the newly introduced steel stamp using oil-based ink. Postage from London to Newcastle was 12 pence, and the P on the stamp indicates that this was paid by the sender. The scribbled cancellation across the address confirms this. The recipient is Cecilia Hoyle, mother of 4 boys, of whom John Theodore was the eldest. She was the wife of Richard Hoyle, a merchant and owner of several businesses. No doubt she was delighted to receive news from London from her son, who chose to become a solicitor rather than join the family businesses. The letter is packed with information, and I've been thinking about how to make use of it, and I would love to have your input and ideas today. It includes mention of many aspects of early 19th century society and can be used to develop a sense of the junior lawyer and his world. My analysis will have to be multi-layered, and the slide has some suggestions of approaches I can take. The letter has social and cultural significance, and I will use primarily a biographical and microhistorical lens to examine it. In October 1830, Hoyle was 22, and in the final months of his 5-year articles of clerkship with Newcastle firm Donkin and Stable, under the tutelage of leading northern lawyer Armourer Donkin. Now, I don't know whether the letter describes Hoyle's first trip to London. Donkin and Stable had close links with a firm in Hatton Gardens, Megasons and Poole, so perhaps Hoyle had visited London before 1830. Although I feel the wonder and excitement communicated in the letter suggests that this was a first trip. On the slide, you can see Hoyle 6 months later, in 1831, at a fancy dress ball, dressed as Rodolfo from the smash hit German opera Der Freischütz, the Sharpshooter. This was performed at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane in November 1830, and I can imagine he attended a performance and took his experience back to Newcastle, demonstrating his cosmopolitan tastes. So have this young man in mind when I read the letter, and not the man in the suit shown earlier. And now to the letter. My slides show contemporary pictures of the places and people mentioned. Analysis and examination of such images alongside the letter will be important, but of course I don't have time today. 61 St John Street Road. My dearest M, you will most likely have heard from Mr. Nicol that I've arrived in good condition. I have got settled in comfortable lodgings at the place above mentioned, which is near to the Angel Islington. The weather was so disgusting, I came up inside all the way, stopping at night at Lancaster and Liverpool. At the latter place I spent an afternoon, viewed the docks, which are so full you can see nothing but ships, the new burying ground, close by which Dr. Formby has built a most splendid mansion. Mrs. F. was at Bootle and Charlotte at Sheffield. I left the letters and my card, and the doctor, happening to call at his house before going out to Bootle, saw them, sent down to the hotel today that Bootle was only 4 miles from Liverpool and that Mrs. F. would be glad to see me there. However, I had previously taken my place in the railway coach for 7 the next morning, and it being 6 o'clock before I received the doctor's message, I could not very well get there. And now for the railway. We went the whole space, 30.5 miles in 2.5 hours, including stoppages. The speed of the engines varies on different parts of the road, and when against the hill, they go comparatively slow. Some of the way, they went at the rate of 1 mile in 2 minutes. The carriages are very well fitted up, and one engine draws 8 or 9. The company have been received of £2,300 a week for passengers alone. The whole expenses of the undertaking was £900,000. It is to be lighted the whole way by gas. And talking of gas, I've not seen any improvements in the way of lamps upon the one Papa has. Those at the new post office, Bull and Mouth Street, are the most recent and are upon the same plan. Well, I got here Monday, 11 o'clock, stopped at Blossom's Inn, Lawrence Lane, Cheapside. I have been here 3 days without having had my pocket picked. Gordon is very unwell. Both he and Mr. Nicol received me very kindly. The latter took me about several places yesterday, and I spent the morning with him in Hackney, where I met H. Morton. Nicol came with me to look at these lodgings, took me to his dining place, to the Bank of England, new post office, Guildhall, where saw the preparations for entertaining the King, Gog and Magog. But London is not nearly so fine as Edinburgh. The buildings are all brick and stucco, though I have not yet been to the Regent's Park, where I understand they have a few stone houses. It is very easy to find your way in London, and at nights, instead of the rowdy confusion and robberies the police reports would lead you to suppose, the folks are tolerably orderly, and every 20 yards you meet a new policeman on a horse patrol in the suburbs. My landlord is the surveyor of Clerkenwell, and a very decent sort of man. I pay him 14 shillings a week, but coals, candles, boots, so he tells me, are extra, which makes it a guinea. I breakfast on tea at home and dine at a place near Lincoln's Inn. Write to me at Watson's, where I am just going, but shall not be in a hurry to fix myself before Monday next. Called on Mrs. Crawhall and Mr. Wickie, the latter not at home. I'm going to dine in Newcastle Street, but I forget which day. Love to all, particularly the buzzard, and don't forget to acknowledge Archibald Reed for the nut trees, and pray take the lilac trees out of the hedge in the strawberry walk, and get Jerry Dodd to cut the other hedges. Yours affectionately, J.T. Hoyle. N.B. When you send a parcel by ship, send my Latin grammar. There are 2 Eton ones somewhere. Probably one of them will be in the set of books that come from my office. So this letter tells us much about Hoyle and his life in the early 19th century. Taken together with my doctoral study of his life, it contributes to a biographical portrait of a young solicitor at the beginning of his career. Hoyle's lodgings at 61 St John Street Road, Clerkenwell, look like the picture on the slide, quite different from home in Newcastle, which was an open countryside. I'm sure you will agree that this is a wonderful letter. It suggests a close relationship with his mother and conveys the excitement of his travels. Hoyle gives his mother news of people she knows. He tells her he delivered her letters, assures her he is properly housed and well fed, and sets her mind at rest about the dangers of London. Or perhaps there really was a policeman on horseback every 20 yards in 1830. He underlines when he will start work, having made contact with Watson, and tells her when she can contact him, and demonstrates he's thinking of home by reminding her of gardening jobs. The slide lists the places and the people in the letter, and in the time I have left, I'm going to elaborate briefly on two: Watson and the railway. Watson is William Henry Watson, later Baron Watson, and he was the reason for Hoyle being in London. Watson was brought up in the northeast of England, but in 1816 he was admitted to Lincoln's Inn and licensed to practice under the bar as a special pleader. He built a successful practice and in 1832 took the plunge and was called to the bar, following which he practiced on the Northern Circuit, eventually being appointed as a QC and finally a Baron of the Exchequer in 1856. Watson, a veteran of Waterloo, also served as a Liberal MP. Hoyle was politically liberal, although his family were Conservatives, and the influence of Armourer Donkin, his mentor in Newcastle, and Watson undoubtedly helped shape his politics. The introduction to Watson was likely via his fellow article clerk William Armstrong, whose sister was married to Watson. Armstrong later left the law and made his fortune as an entrepreneur, engineer and industrialist. He was knighted in 1859 and became first Baron Armstrong of Cragside in 1887. Armstrong also spent some of his legal apprenticeship with Watson, so it may have been a common pattern for a provincial article clerk to seek further experience in the capital. I don't know the answer to this question yet and will have to investigate further. What sort of experience would Hoyle have had with Watson? Watson himself said he didn't have much formal education other than a little reading and writing, and reports suggest his advocacy, though highly successful, was hearty and forcible, but involved and ungrammatical. However, he was kind and accessible and popular with fellow barristers and judges. Sergeant William Ballantyne, who wrote a memoir, Some Experiences of a Barrister's Life, was one of Watson's pupils, and wrote that his pupil master permitted his pupils to learn what they could, and judging by myself, this was very little. I have little to record of the 2 years I passed in these chambers, alongside a mass of papers, copying precedents of pleading which were a disgrace to common sense, and in gossip with my brother students, most of them as idle as myself. This, of course, may say more about Ballantyne than Watson. Hoyle, who developed into a meticulous and hard-working lawyer, recorded that Watson was keen to incite his pupils to industry in the pursuit of their profession. I now want to briefly return to the railway. In the letter, Hoyle explains that he took the cross-country coach to Liverpool via Lancaster to ride on the Liverpool-Manchester Railway. In this, he was an early adopter. The line had opened on the 15th of September 1830, approximately a month before his trip. However, Hoyle was not merely an adventurous traveller. Both he and his mother invested in railway stock, a bold move, and perhaps the result of this investigative journey. He was also involved in the bringing of gas lighting to Newcastle, perhaps also inspired by the trip. Little has been written about the lives and work of 19th century solicitors. They are the Cinderella profession to the more flamboyant bar. Further investigation into their training, their lives and networks offers a fruitful and thus far missing insight into the day-to-day workings of the law in the 19th century as practised and lived by ordinary provincial solicitors. My letter, both as a material cultural item and its contents, can be dissected using a biographical and microhistorical lens to gain insight. I have mentioned Baron Watson and the railway, but there are other stories to uncover. For example, Dr. Formby is the founder of the Liverpool Infirmary, and his wife, Mrs. F., is the cousin of Robert Peel, who was, of course, responsible for the police Hoyle saw in London. The letter is a window into the early 19th century, and by following the clues, I can reconstruct elements of the early life of the man who eventually became the Newcastle Borough Coroner. Analysis of the letter, fortuitously listed on eBay, will bring a fascinating insight into an influential provincial legal life. And just one more thing before I finish. Although I'm fortunate that Hoyle writes clearly, there are two words I can't decipher, and I wondered if you can help me. Please email if you'd like a closer look. The first one is something that can be sent by sea. The sentence says NB when you send, and perhaps the word is abbreviated form of parcel. And the second says, I'm going to dine in, and then the name of a street. Now, it might be Newcastle Street, which was off the Strand and demolished to make way for the Aldwych, but you may be able to offer an alternative. Any insight gratefully received. Thank you very much.